Hello, and welcome to the channel. In this video, my quest is to craft a scene from The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf goes into the archives of Minas Tirith. It has always been an extremely memorable scene from the movie. I remember being a little kid watching it on VHS, seeing him go down there and he's surrounded by the piles of books and the scrolls, and he's smoking his pipe and he's trying to find out if the ring is actually the one ring from the account of Isildur. It's phenomenal storytelling. It's the coolest wizard quest of all time. Anyways, I digress. My secondary quest is to learn how to craft with patience. I have been guilty of not having patience in this room, in this garage, in this workspace, and it shows sometimes. And I've seen people like Night Shift crafting who just have the most meticulous eye for the small details, and they maintain that quality, and it really is inspirational to me. And for a long time, I've just said, I'm not capable of doing that, or I could never do that. I wouldn't have the patience. And the first time I've actually sat down and tried to do that thing, of course my results, I would say, are not to the level of crafting that he is, but I did it. And they're in scale, and I finished all of the walls, regardless of how mind-bogglingly tall they are. And for that, I'm really proud, I'd say. Anyways, let's get to the footage so I stop rambling now. I started by cutting the walls and the floor to size. What dictated the precise size that I used here was the height and depth of the Lord of the Rings books that I have in my bookshelf. I lightly sketched out how much floor space I had, just to see what I was working with. I knew I needed several different levels for this archive space because just a ground floor, given how much vertical space I had, would look kind of weird. I freehanded a staircase and then started cutting it up with the Proxon wire cutter. I cut that staircase into 4mm high sections and then freehanded the difference between each step with an X-Acto blade. This allowed me to rotate and manipulate the direction of the stairs using that removed section. I saw Gerard from Shifting Lands make stairs this way and was really excited to try it out. This is much easier to do if you keep the original cut and line up the stairs against it during the gluing phase. I pinned the steps together and then left it out to dry. After that was done, I made a couple bookshelves out of balsa wood strips. I wasn't too particular about the shape and distance between each shelf because I wanted a chaotic and busy look, especially once I added all the books and scrolls. Now that I had the size of the bookshelves figured out, this helped me understand how many bricks I needed to scribe, and the answer to that was so many. These dimensions are 8mm long by 2.5mm tall. I see this being used in 28mm scale, and I figured it was a good place to start for in-scale crafting. Once I had sections of it finished, I broke up the monotony of scribing and widening each brick using a sculpting tool. Breaking this up into bite-sized portions was a necessity for me in completing the task. Remember when I said that it's useful to keep foam offcuts? Well, we kept the very first one, and that's perfect because it ended up being a portion of the second floor. Because there was going to be so much brickwork in this piece, any opportunity I had to break up sections into different shapes and materials, I took. This included wood grain and stone slabs. It was at this point I realized I was procrastinating the brickwork, so I decided to dive back into it. I figured it'd be cool to simulate just how deep the archive was by including a small walkway near the top. I used the Proxon to cut along one of the horizontal incisions to reach where the door would be. I then used a piece of cardboard to guide the hot wire along my desired shape. Once I had the off-cut door, I sliced a portion of it off, then textured it with a different brick pattern from the wall. I also added some wood grain as well. This gave the door a recessed look, which provided a lot of depth. Once I was done with that, I used the same methods for the archway on the right side wall. I needed to make supporting pillars for the new walkway and doors, so I cut strips of XPS foam and then cut them with the Shifting Lands angle cutter at 45 degrees. I trimmed the ridge and then sanded it afterwards to get a rounded shape. I cut them and then textured them with the old trusty rock. With that done, I had the majority of the back wall finished. This is when the build got really fun for me. Firstly, I started with a familiar balsa wood table, but I needed a main subject to sit behind that table. Since my sculpting abilities aren't at, let's say, 28mm skills yet, I had to improvise on Hero Forge. I couldn't find a good robe that I liked for Gandalf, so I ended up kind of digitally sculpting the guy that does chin-ups at the local park jungle gym at 6 in the morning, but with a pipe. He looks great.
Another score was finding these little brass looking keys and discovering that they could house little LEDs inside. If I scored and bent them in a particular way, it would even pinch the LEDs in a way that hid them entirely. These things are absolute game changers for displaying candles at the 28mm scale. With a little hot glue and some finessing, you can shape a convincing flame on the tops of these candle holders in like 15 seconds. For the other candles that I'll be positioning in the walls, I used 3mm diameter styrene rods. I superglued a tiny bit near the LED and then just slid them into place. Now I could finally start painting. I used this goblin skin color as a base coat for all 3 walls. In random spots, I sprayed burnt umber and other earthy tones as well. I wanted to keep the room relatively warm, so I chose to stay away from a cold, cool palette as best as I could. I painted the bookshelves, doors, and any other unpainted wood. I just used a variety of the flat, basic brown acrylic paints that I had, and then kind of dry brushed a lighter tone over the tops of that to pick up the texture. I did the edge of the doors and the pillars with grays, and that may have been a mistake. But I ended up kind of liking the change in color, so it wasn't the end of the world for me. I found some light yellows, flesh tones, and made a very soft pink, and individually painted sections of bricks. My goal here was to catch the eye of someone looking at the walls, but not to demand their gaze. After I washed everything, I dry brushed that same goblin color over the tops of the bricks. I could finally start gluing things in place, so I put the stairs where they needed to be, and then shortly after that, glued the bookcase on top. I painted the archway black to try and simulate that the room kept going, and then it was on to the final details. On Etsy, I purchased some simple book covers and printed them out 75% smaller than the original file size. I sliced them up with some scissors, applied glue from a glue stick, and then wrapped them in foam board that I cut to size. I think I fell in love with making scrolls. It's just so simple and they are so easy to make. I literally cut strips of paper, applied a glue stick, and rolled. You can make groups of 2 and bundle them together, use burnt paper, write little notes, and make darker parchment. I know the theme of this video is about patience, but it's perfect too if you are very impatient. Because even if you are too lazy to wait for it to dry after you've painted over it, you can just shred the paper, and the scrolls look like they've been shredded over time from misuse or neglect. It's so fun. And the craziest part about it is it's not even the best part. Dipping it in glue and then putting them on the shelves that you've been making is just so rewarding. I printed a photo of the Tree of Gondor, and then bent it and made it battle-worn. Maybe it's a retired battle standard. The final assembly can now begin. After inserting and soldering the LEDs in parallel, I painted them yellow. Off camera, I made an in-regulation railing for the 3rd story, and an out-of-regulation ladder for the death bookshelf. I painted and inserted little pins for the doorknobs, and then cut off the excess in the back. Finally, I finished Gandalf the Grey. I started with sculpting that missing robe out of green stuff, and rolling my sculpting tool along his shoulders to try and simulate folds in the cloth. I think he turned out pretty good. I primed him and then dry brushed a lot of whites and grays on him. Did some flesh tones on the hands. I even gave Narya a touch of red for you super nerds out there. Once he was done, my quests were complete. Here are the final shots of my Gandalf book nook. Thanks for watching.
So here it is, the finished book nook scene of Gandalf. I found out that I love making scrolls, especially if there's no rules. It doesn't matter what color or what size or if they're frayed or if they're burnt. It's just fun to make a bunch of scrolls and stick them under the desk and beside the desk and in bookshelves, the very dangerous OSHA landmine bookshelves. But yeah, I made everything to scale, or at least I think I got close, and that was new for me, and it was a challenge, but it was a fun challenge. If you enjoyed this video, or you want to support me, or you want to see what's coming next, liking and subscribing, commenting, ringing the bell so you can get notified when I make a new video, it's all really helpful for me. If you've got a favorite scene from the Fellowship of the Ring, comment it below. I'd love to hear about it and talk to you about it. Once again, thank you for making it this far in the video, and I'll see you next time.